Have you ever noticed something? The times when you felt most certain you were right, when the answer seemed completely obvious, those were often the times you understood the least. When you were most confident in your position, when you couldn't imagine how anyone could disagree, that's when you probably hadn't thought deeply enough to realize what you were missing. And when you felt the strongest urge to demand that everyone else would see it your way. And that's when you're trapped in a psychological phenomenon you didn't even know existed. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And I've been caught in it. You've been caught in it. We're all caught in it about something, probably even right now. Let me show you what I mean. So, this is a graph that should be taught in every school in America, in my opinion. The horizontal axis is competence, how much you actually know. The vertical axis is confidence, how much you think you know. If knowledge and confidence tracked together, this line would go straight up. The more you learn, the more confident you become. It makes sense, right? But that's not actually what happens. Look at this. When you first learn about something, your confidence shoots up immediately. You learn a few facts, grasp a basic concept, and suddenly you feel like an expert. I like to think of this as the pinnacle of certainty. You don't know enough to know what you don't know. Everything feels obvious. The answer seems simple. Anyone who disagrees with you is either stupid or lying. You're at maximum confidence with minimum understanding. But then, if you keep learning, something happens. Your confidence plummets. You discover that the issue is more complex than you thought. You encounter perspectives you hadn't considered. You realize there are entire dimensions to this topic that you didn't even know existed. This is the valley of despair. One of the problems we face is that most people never make it here because the valley of despair, it feels like failure. It feels like you're getting worse at understanding things, not better. And so they retreat back to the pinnacle of certainty where everything was simple and they knew they were right. But if you keep going, if you push through the discomfort, your confidence eventually rises again. But this time it's different. It's not the false confidence of ignorance, it's the earned confidence of genuine understanding. You know what you know what you don't know. You can hold complexity without needing to collapse it into certainty. They call this the slope of enlightenment. This slope of enlightenment increases confidence in your convictions, but interestingly, you're never going to again reach the heights that you were at the pinnacle of certainty. Your trip through the valley of despair has done more than increase your knowledge. It's actually gifted you with humility. Now, personally, I've noticed it's so easy to get trapped at the pinnacle of certainty. Sometimes I learn just enough about an issue to feel certain. So this model, the Dunning-Kruger effect, is a great example of that. When I first learned about this, I shared it with some of my friends, only to realize later that they didn't truly understand what I was even talking about. The funny thing is, while I was initially sharing it, I was certain that I understood the model perfectly and that what I was saying was absolutely true. But then I went ahead and I watched a few more videos. I read a couple of articles and I did a little bit of research. And I had to face the fact that I still have a lot to learn. And this happens to all of us. It's not that we're bad people, we're not stupid. We genuinely believe we understand. Personally, it happens to me because I get excited about the new information that I've encountered. I get excited about learning something new and I want to share it. But in the beginning, without taking time to learn more, we don't know enough to know we're missing something. Now consider how this plays out when people are discussing something like immigration. When people say things like, this is simple, we need open borders, or flip it, we need closed borders, or something like, anyone who disagrees is evil, stupid, destroying America. What's happening is they're most likely proudly camped out on the pinnacle of certainty. But when someone is in the valley of despair, it sounds different. It sounds like this. Wait, there are different types of immigration? Legal, illegal, asylum seekers, refugees, temporary workers, family reunification. Economic impact can vary by region and industry. There are humanitarian obligations, but also practical limits. Historical precedents point in different directions. They begin to realize that this is actually really more complicated than we first thought. And then when we've made it to the slope of enlightenment, we start saying things, and it sounds more like this. Immigration involves competing goods and legitimate tensions. Border security matters and humanitarian treatment matters. Economic impacts are mixed and context dependent. I need to think about policies that acknowledge these complexities rather than pretending one value trumps all others. You can hear the difference, right? Moving off the pinnacle of certainty is hard because it feels amazing. It feels like strength. It feels like moral courage. And on the flip side, uncertainty feels terrible. It feels like weakness, like cowardice, like moral confusion. Our brains are wired to prefer certainty. It's less cognitively demanding. It's socially rewarding. Our tribes celebrate us for being certain about the right things. Certainty is emotionally satisfying. We get to feel righteous. And uncertainty, it requires constant cognitive effort. It's socially punishing. Both sides attack us for not picking a side. It's emotionally uncomfortable. We have to live with the discomfort of not knowing. So, of course, we want to choose certainty. Of course, we want to stay on the pinnacle of certainty. It's called the Valley of Despair for a reason. But here's what the Dunning-Kruger curve helps me understand. Certainty is a measure of my ignorance, not my knowledge. The less I know, the more certain I can be, because I haven't encountered the complexity yet. And this is why polarization is so hard to solve. When we're most trapped in polarization, we're most certain that we're right. And when we're most certain we're right, we often understand it the least. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're wrong about everything. What it does mean is that when we are on the pinnacle of certainty, we're often operating from a place of false confidence. We don't know enough to even know what we don't know. And when someone tries to introduce nuance, when they try to show us the complexity that we may be missing, we experience it as an attack because in our mental model, we've already figured this out. The answers are obvious to us. So anyone suggesting it's more complicated, well, they must have an agenda. We think nuance is a threat to our clarity rather than a sign of deeper understanding. And this is what keeps us locked in tribal warfare because we never develop the epistemic humility to consider that we might be missing something. To get beyond our culture wars, we have to be willing to enter the valley of despair. We have to be willing to feel confused. We have to be willing to admit to ourselves that even though we thought we had full understanding, it's actually more complicated than we realized. This isn't weakness. This is learning. Every genuine expert in every field has spent time in the valley of despair. They had to unlearn their initial simplistic understanding before they could develop real expertise. The valley is not a detour, it's actually the path. But in our current culture, we're taught to fake certainty even when we're confused. We're taught to simplify even when we know it's more complex than that. We're taught to perform confidence rather than admit uncertainty. The middle that I'm trying to create is found in the place you get to after you've descended into the valley and climbed out the other side. This is what makes it so hard because you arrive in the middle after you've wrestled with complexity, after you understand that most important issues involve competing goods, not good versus evil. You're in the middle after you've developed the cognitive muscle to hold nuance without collapsing into certainty. It's a mistake to believe that the middle is for people who don't care or can't decide. The middle is for people who understand enough to know that simple answers are usually wrong answers. So, how do I know when I'm standing on the pinnacle of certainty? Well, I ask myself these three questions. Does this answer feel like it's glaringly obvious to me? And when it feels too simple, I probably actually don't understand it yet. The second question is, can I articulate the strongest version of the opposing view? If I can only argue against the straw man argument, then I'm not engaging with it in reality. And the third question I ask myself is, do I feel angry when someone introduces nuance? If complications feel like attacks, then I'm protecting my certainty and I'm not pursuing truth. This requires us to be honest with ourselves. Try it. Pick one issue where you feel certain, the one where you're most convinced that you're right. And if anyone tries to introduce nuance, you're going to be angry. And then once you have it in your mind, go learn about it. Not from sources that you agree with, but learn from the smartest people who disagree with you. And don't do this just because you're going to try to prepare yourself to win an argument. Do it to gain understanding. Because if you really do this, I think that there's three possible outcomes. The first one is this: you'll realize the issue is more complicated than you thought, and your certainty will decrease, but your understanding will actually increase, and you're going to enter into the valley. The second possible outcome is that you'll come out more convinced that you were right, but now you'll understand why smart people disagree. You'll be able to articulate their position better than maybe even they can, and your certainty might remain, but it will be earned certainty, not ignorant certainty. In fact, I would give up using the phrase certainty at all, and I would say you have advanced to conviction. The third is this: you might actually change your mind. And it's not because you were wrong and they were right, but because you now see dimensions of issues that you didn't even know existed before. And let's be honest, I think that all three of these are wins because all three of them, what they do is they move you off of the pinnacle of certainty. So we have to be willing to feel uncertain. We have to be willing to question what we think we already know. We have to be willing to learn. I believe this is extremely important work. My social media feeds, they show me content that confirms what I already believe. The news that I consume, it makes everything seem urgent and obvious. Even the voices that I follow, they offer simple solutions to complex problems. And it seems like everyone around me is performing certainty because that's what gets rewards. I feel the pull of it, the temptation to grasp certainty, to keep it simple, to not complicate things. But the real world is complex. Climate change is complicated. Immigration is complicated. Healthcare is complicated. Foreign policy is complicated. Economic policy is complicated. Any issue that involves millions of people with different values, different contexts, and different priorities, they're going to be complicated. And when I tell myself it's simple, I'm either lying to myself or I don't understand it yet. When you insist that it's obvious, you're probably missing something. When we demand simple answers to complex problems, we're choosing comfort over truth. Imagine if we could transform our culture into one where saying, I don't know, is seen as the beginning of wisdom, not an admission of failure. We're saying it's complicated is seen as intellectual honesty, not moral cowardice. And admitting I changed my mind is seen as evidence of learning, not weakness. And maybe we can get to the point where uncertainty is seen as the foundation of curiosity and not a threat to convictions. In order to transform our world, we're going to have to stop pretending that we've got it all figured out. We have to be willing to be uncertain. We have to celebrate when we don't know something. We have to model the vulnerability of admitting when we're wrong. The culture is only going to shift when we shift, not when we convince those people to change, but when we are willing to change ourselves. That's the work for me, for you, for all of us. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just an interesting psychological phenomenon. I think it's a mirror. When I look at our cultural moment, when I see us celebrating certainty and punishing uncertainty, I realize I'm actually looking at myself. The times I've been most certain were often the times I understood the least. The moments I felt most righteous were often the moments I was most wrong. The issues where I thought the answer was obvious were the issues I hadn't studied deeply enough. The way forward is not to demand that I have the better answers, but to get better at holding questions, to develop the epistemic humility to admit when we don't know, to build the cognitive strength to sit with complexity without collapsing into false certainty, not so that we can become moderate or neutral or wishy washy, but to become genuinely wise, to earn our convictions instead of inheriting them, and to understand enough to know what we don't understand.